I can't believe it's been 6 years now since Obsidian Entertainment released the first Outer Worlds. Back when these guys barely released a game every couple of years, where they're now at a point where they've released 3 in 2025 alone. With Grounded 2, Avowed, and case in point Outer Worlds 2, the standalone sequel to the first game, which continues the whole New Vegas in space thing they had going on there. Set in a retro-futuristic, alternate history with elements of dark comedy and political satire, along with different factions, companions to pick from, and actual role-playing that affected the overall experience.
Why did you not mention any of this before?
And if you like what they did the first time around, then you're no doubt gonna like what's going on here too, because in a lot of ways, this really is a superior game.
Yeah, I reckon that's good.
If you're expecting some kind of groundbreaking new experience though, well, don't hold your breath. But as far as RPGs go that let you planet hop and shoot things in the face, you could do a hell of a lot worse. Let's find out why that is, shall we? But before I get too far into things, I do have to thank NVIDIA and Asus for sponsoring this video. Get the ultimate Borderlands 4 experience with the AI-powered performance benefits of DLSS 4, with multi-frame generation and the lowest latency with NVIDIA Reflex. DLSS is a suite of rendering technologies powered by GeForce RTX tensor cores, designed to boost frame rates while delivering crisp, high-quality images that rivals native resolution, which all works with over 700 RTX games and apps, Outer Worlds 2 included, utilizing optical multi-frame generation to generate entirely new frames and integrate NVIDIA's low latency technology to maximize PC responsiveness, even multiplying performance up to an average of 5.5 times at 4K Ultra settings. Plus, it also works in tandem with NVIDIA Reflex, optimizing responsiveness and giving gamers faster reaction times and precision in competitive games. In fact, Reflex is automatically enabled when DLSS is turned on. But yeah, and speaking of, turning it on is pretty easy too. You just go into the graphics setting, you activate DLSS, and then scroll down to frame generation and make sure it's turned up to 4. Simple.
Wow.
GeForce RTX 50 series is now restocked and reloaded, so if it's been a while since you looked for a new system or a graphics card, well, now is a great time with a bunch of great options to choose from. And yeah, once again, thanks to NVIDIA and Asus for sponsoring this video. So the story takes place in a completely different star system from the first game, in an all-new one called Arcadia, at a point where, yet again, powerful corporations dominate every facet of life. You're playing as an unnamed agent of the Earth Directorate, which is the closest thing we've got to the good guys, basically being akin to space police. And much like the first game too, you can make your character look however you want them to, choosing from a whole bunch of different options, along with their background, basic traits, and starting skills. With this stuff being pretty overwhelming at first, with there being a dozen or so a LUP you can choose from. There's even a third-person camera option now too, so you can actually see them, compared to the first game where you were just locked into that first-person mode the entire time. Either way though, the whole thing starts off with you heading to a space station with a bunch of other agents to retrieve a skip drive, which is a device that's been causing all these interdimensional rifts, with one of these agents being a woman named Augustine DeVries, who's planned out this entire mission.
As unbelievable as it may sound.
Now this introduces us to the main enemy faction, the Protectorate, as well as serving as a bit of a tutorial, letting you choose what kind of approach you want to take to this starting mission, and then get a bit of an idea for how you might like to apply that for the rest of the campaign. Regardless of what you go with though, at the end of this prologue, for story reasons I'm not going to spoil, this station gets pulled into one of these rifts, ending up with a player jettisoned out into space and lost out there for a decade. Thankfully though, you're rescued by your buddy Niles and faithful robot Val, and the three of you then head off to try and find answers about what happened on the station, with your first stop being the town of Fairfield, with there then being over half a dozen other planets and areas you'll explore as well. I mean, Fairfield's on the planet of Eden, but you'll also head to Dorado, Praetor, Cloister, and the Undisputed Claim, which is the base of operations for one of those main factions. Kinda like a big, giant mega mall with holographic advertisements all over the place. Along with Free Market Station, which is its own self-contained smuggler's den, with there being quite a lot of visual variety between each of these areas. And it is a bit of a substantial upgrade over those visuals in the first game, running on the Unreal Engine 5 because of course it does, but thankfully giving me practically no serious performance issues or any kind of crashes in the 20 or so hours I spent with it. Yeah, which for a game in 2025 is astounding. The dialogue still does have that feeling though, where you feel like you're just interacting with talking heads, but it is a damn sight better than it was in Avowed, where some of the responses and lines there were so bad that it made my ancestors cringe.
Sorry for the mess, but it can't be helped. Not when a fucking horde of dream thralls screams up the path.
It can feel a bit like a loading screen simulator at times as well when you're flying to the different planets, but once you're out of the ship, these large open maps are able to be explored seamlessly. And outside your main mission, there's a whole heap of other distractions throughout as well. But even just the story itself offers up lots of different approaches. For instance, one of the very first main missions when you arrive at Fairfield is to help one of two NPCs, who in turn will help you get into a nearby facility. But choosing one over the other is going to instantly cut off that other person's quest chain.
Aid me, and I suspect he'll rescind any offer he may have made to you.
For no real reason, I just ended up helping this guy named Milver Street, which then had me also heading to a nearby settlement to sabotage vital components to convince its inhabitants to move back to Fairfield. So right away, like, this is going to massively split the kind of experience people are going to have in these early hours, you know, depending on which characters you end up siding with.
Well, you seem rather confident.
And it's the kind of thing that keeps going on throughout the entire game, with there being some pretty big moments where you get to decide the fate of some of these key characters. Even just in whether or not you meet some of these companions and have them join up with you, like the kind of thing you could easily miss.
That's disappointing.
But yeah, and speaking of companions, these guys all come from one of the main factions too. Your boy Niles, for instance, is an Earth Directorate agent. Inez used to work for Arnie's Choice. Aza is a Glorious Dawn assassin. Marisol worked for the Order, and Tristan's an Arbiter for the Protectorate. And it is kind of cool seeing these guys bounce off each other when they're in your party, often having some pretty wild takes or opinions you can either agree or disagree with. During combat though, I did find them to be slightly less useful, and even after you put a fair bit of time into them and upgraded all their abilities, they still seem to go down faster than Mountain Dew at a speedrunning event.
I'm alive.
And I just kind of felt like I spent most of my time reviving them during combat. Their abilities also sound good on paper, but they don't really seem to affect combat all that much either. Inez, for instance, has an ability that lets her heal you, but the amount she actually heals is super low, and the cooldown is so long that you're genuinely better off just having her focus on tanking damage instead. Where much like Aza, Niles, and Marisol, it just looked like she was bending the knee for pretty much every single fight. There doesn't really seem to be that much of a difference in attack DPS between all of them either, and it really just boils down to whether or not they're doing melee or ranged damage. Marisol, for instance, uses guns, and Aza uses knives. Is it Aza or Aza? So most of the time, the decision of who was going to be in my party was just based off who could give me the best passive buffs.
Well, never mind that.
About the only one who seemed to be all that decent was Tristan, who ran around with his giant hammer, schwacking everything he could get his hands on. And I know that you can buff all of these guys up by putting points into leadership, which, you know, would make them more effective, but then, as a result of that, you'd also be seriously overlooking your own skills.
I'm alive.
On a positive note though, they've made it so when they use their abilities, it's now instant instead of showing off this animation that you can't skip.
Meanwhile...
Outer Worlds 2 brings back that time dilation device from the first game, which is basically bullet time mode, slowing things down to a crawl and giving you ample time to make more accurate shots. But then it's also necessary a few times during certain puzzles, like slowing down giant ventilation fans so you can move through them without getting turned into mincemeat. The one you're likely to get after that is a pair of boots that gives you a second jump, which makes navigation a lot easier. And then after that, it's the acidic dematerializer, which is just a fancy way of saying acid spray, handy for removing dead bodies when you're trying to sneak around. Even though the penalty for enemies actually finding dead bodies is so minor that most of the time it doesn't even matter. Another one is the N-ray scanner, which not only shows hidden traps, but also invisible enemies, with there being a whole mission in there set inside an underground lab where you need this thing to spot all these cloaked cultists. But then even just using this thing during stealth or combat to help locate the enemies was really useful too. Apparently as well, there's a shield in there somewhere, but I don't know, it seems I somehow missed this thing. Either way though, none of these feel like gimmicks that pop up once and never come back again. And it really feels like they've tried their best here to integrate this stuff in a way where you're encouraged to use it over and over. Now, the two main friendly factions in the game, or the least neutral to begin with, is Arnie's Choice and then the Order. Arnie's Choice is a humongous galaxy-wide corporation who just want to turn every single possible thing they can get their hands onto into a commodity, which is why everywhere you go, you'll see these holographic ads for whatever kind of snake oil they're peddling next. Everyone you interact with who works for the company has a weird job title like VP of Proprietary Inside Acquisition, and they all talk like they work in HR, which, I don't know, I guess they more or less do.
More succinctly, we are recruiting an expert outside consultant.
Then the Order is kinda similar to the Brotherhood of Steel and the Institute in the Fallout games, a group that favours religion and science, more concerned with preserving humanity's future than finding a way to improve their bottom line. Though in that sense it also makes them seem archaic, because their idea of preserving humanity is also just hiding away all of its secrets.
I assure you, we were not.
And a big component of the story is trying to get both of these two groups working together for assistance in taking on the Protectorate, which is that authoritarian group responsible for creating the skip drives that have caused this mess to begin with. More or less just religious zealots with a strong military focus that are people shipped off to special refreshment centers if they ever talk back.
But I feel compelled not to question it too much. Maybe the treatment is working.
Despite the game letting you choose what standing you have with those two friendly groups though, I can't imagine what purpose it would serve to not be in their good graces. However, if that's the route you want to take, you absolutely can. Because much like Outer Worlds 1, this is the kind of game where your decisions and actions do have ramifications. Something which was such a nice change of pace coming into this thing after playing Bloodlines 2. You know, and how this is actually a role-playing game, where your character build can genuinely affect how things play out, either giving you access to or locking you out of certain options when you're trying to complete missions. Fuck! Now in these kind of games, I pretty much always go for a stealth build combined with a high charisma or speech stat so I can bullshit my way through conversations. The kind of character that'd be able to sell ice to Eskimos or condoms to a nun. And there were numerous times in the story where I could not only smooth talk my way through hostile situations or otherwise dead ends, but even talk down potential boss fights and skip over those entirely, making someone see reason and stand down.
How could I have failed to recognize such gaps in my predictions?
In fact, there's a pretty big moment there in the story where you need to act as a mediator between Arnie's choice and the Order. And I don't think this is even possible to get everyone on the same page without having a master's degree in the gift of the gab.
Goodwill rarely converts well into bits, but I suppose I do take your point.
As for the stealth thing, well, this let me also sneak through entire sections of the map without getting into combat, which almost made things too easy at times. Simply because I had a build where the amount of points I'd put into speech would also increase the damage I did against humans, which meant I was able to go around pretty much one-shotting every single enemy with a sneak attack without ever getting detected, crouch walking up behind someone and whacking them in the ass. And then even if someone wasn't facing the way I wanted them to, there's a gadget you can throw out to distract them, along with the other gadget that completely dissolves their dead body. I even found this hammer weapon later on which used shotgun shells, making this even easier. Which made me want to start focusing on gun skills from that point on, using a sneak attack to initiate combat and take out the toughest enemy before then just mopping everyone else up. And it really feels like it's the kind of game where you can choose the approach you want to have to a situation, with there almost always being secondary options if you're lacking the required perk or skill. Yeah, and speaking of perks, Outer Worlds 2 brings back the flaws from the first game, similar to the traits in New Vegas, which are also perks you can choose from that come with both positive and negative effects. Like this one for instance, which makes it so every time I crouch, my knees pop so loudly that it alerts nearby enemies. And as a man rapidly approaching his 40s, I couldn't think of anything more suitable. Compared to Avowed, where settlements and other NPCs may as well have been mannequins, here there's consequences for your actions. So you can't just go around stealing people's stuff.
You're lucky we're patient sorts.
And if you initiate combat in a town, you'll even get a wanted status, and a bounty you'll eventually have to pay off. In fact, you can totally fuck up your standing with a faction to the point that you'll always be attacked on sight, essentially making it impossible to finish the game. This is a positive feature. I also like it too how other characters seem to react to your playstyle. Like at the point where I first met Aza, she made a remark about my stealthy approach.
Architect's balls, that was a fine bit of killing. Oh, I must admit to a preference for more mayhem with my murder.
And then later on, after I'd spent 10 minutes trying to save a bunch of hostages, she commented on how much time we were actually wasting.
I still say it would have saved time for us to just kill the hostages ourselves.
During certain conversations, party members can also create unique responses from NPCs.
With that hat,
Absolutely not.
And there's also backstories for all of these guys as well, which really makes for some of the most interesting missions in the game. Like Inez, for instance, has one where you got to go to all the different planets and track down components for a shoddy arm graft she's had.
Exactly what I was thinking.
And speaking of the missions, there are some genuinely entertaining ones in here too. Like one, for instance, has you trying to resolve some management issues at a fort, where the person or thing calling the shots turns out to be a sentient mantisaur that's able to communicate with humans.
Okay.
There was another mission where I had to stop a worker strike at a factory, trying to barter a deal with both the workers and middle management.
Our shifts need to be reduced to 12 hours a day. 4 hours of personal time ain't even enough to rest, much less get any actual living done.
The only problem is that the manager lady wasn't having a bar of it and refused to budge, even with my high speech skill.
Can you imagine how many bits that loss of productivity will cost us?
So what I ended up doing was I killed her, and then I turned the corpse to ash, which was enough motivation for the workers to get right back to work.
And modern problems require modern solutions.
And then when I reported all of this back to the people who gave me the mission, they were just happy I'd gotten the job done, and didn't even really bother to hear the specifics.
Your instincts are every bit as good as we were expecting. Keep up that kind of go-getting, and you'll absolutely be going places.
And it's just the thing I love about these kind of games, where it gives you an objective marker and points you in the right direction, but it never holds your hand or forces you into a singular approach. You want to sneak through the vents and pickpocket someone to get the key card, or just go in the front door and mow everyone down? I mean, take your pick. Or maybe just lockpick the door and skip over that stuff entirely. As for the combat, well, I did find it to be kind of crappy early on, and about the only decent weapon I had for the first few hours was this triple barrel shotgun, which was a damn sight better than everything else I was coming across at the time. Given Outer Worlds' whole Western in space vibe, there's a whole lot of single shot weapons in there too, like revolvers and repeating rifles, which do good damage but take literally 17 hours to reload. Along with almost World War I era feeling inclusions like a trench shotgun or a machine gun. What really sets these apart though is the whole modding mechanic, and I feel like the game doesn't truly emphasize enough just how much of a difference these weapon mods can make, from simple things like adding optical sights through to adding elemental effects, like giving one of my rifles a plasma mod or an SMG explosive rounds, where kind of like the game's turned into Borderlands. And it wasn't until I really started focusing on this where the combat finally started to get interesting and I could really hold my own. Where it really starts to get broken though is with all these energy weapons, like the plasma pistol for instance, which just seems to do insane damage. One point I even found a silenced plasma pistol, which more or less let me one-shot sneak kill almost everything the game threw at me. But even in combat, this was really useful too, able to be charged up to fire off 3 quick shots, and making it so effective that, again, it just got kinda boring, and how easily it would take everything out. You're definitely not left wanting for options here when it comes to all these weapons either, and I do want to praise some of the more creative additions too. Like this sniper rifle I found, which fired out remotely detonated rounds, which would only explode when I reloaded. And for some reason, hitting people with this thing wouldn't cause them to detect me, meaning I could just shoot someone like 4 or 5 times to load up on the damage, and then detonate everything at once. Because yeah, that's not broken. I also found a shotgun, which I'm going to assume has to be a reference to Anton's shotgun in No Country for Old Men, because it's a very similar looking silenced weapon, which sounds near identical, and also pretty much shreds everything it hits.
Which it is.
Though it did also seem to be glitched out, because despite it saying in the inventory that it's supposed to be whisper quiet, every time I used it, it would still set off every single enemy in the nearby area. And even after I'd also gotten a perk which is supposed to make silenced weapons completely silent. Though maybe that was just the game's weird way of balancing it out, considering how overpowered this thing actually is. Either way, though, I thought it was by far one of the best guns I found in the entire game. Also because I'd gotten an upgrade which made it so shotguns ignored an enemy's armor, essentially just letting me rip right through the tougher ones like the mechs. But then the final gun I settled on for the remainder of the game was actually just a basic assault rifle. Well, I say basic, even though it had a reflex scope and extended mag. Plus it also happened to have 2 barrels and fired like an absolute laser pointer, making it very accurate from even long range. And it was kind of like I was playing Apex Legends, but the enemies were still stuck playing Wolfenstein 3D. That is kind of the problem this game has too, in the balancing, which really just seems all over the place. And it's like, combat's either really tricky and time consuming, or you're just wrecking every single enemy with complete ease. Just kind of feels like there's no middle ground. But then even after I'd been playing for like 10 hours and had some pretty decent gear, there was still a lot of times where I'd just be gunned down in seconds by someone who was able to tear me a new arsehole.
What a pisser.
The other thing is that your only real method for healing during combat is the inhaler, which even then only restores a portion of your overall health. And you're limited in how often you can use this thing because it builds up a toxicity level. So I guess my point is it can be really easy to get between a rock and a hard piece of shit if you take too much damage early on during combat, which can happen due to how inconsistent enemy attacks seem to be. But would it really be an Obsidian game if it didn't come with its fair share of balancing issues or bugs?
Yeah, I reckon that's good.
Though, sad to say, I did actually encounter a few of the latter.
Resorting to violence. Fortificator at ready status.
Like during one of the companion missions, for instance, I literally couldn't finish this because what had happened is I ended up doing the objectives out of order, which then somehow locked me out of interacting with an NPC who I'd spoken to earlier. During another bit where I had to kill all the cultists in a settlement for one of the main factions, enemies would just start randomly spawning inside locked off rooms, which meant that I couldn't get access to them and I couldn't kill them. Which meant I just had to skip over that mission entirely. I am also still a little bit bummed out about how this thing is missing certain other mechanics, like a carry limit. And just like in Avowed, you don't have to worry about your carrying capacity or anything like that. Meaning you can just run around the entire time like an absolute kleptomaniac, picking up every single thing you see. And in fact, at one point, I had to stop looting things and just clean out my inventory, because I had literally dozens of weapons and armor, a lot of which I hadn't even realized I'd picked up. And then finally, for some reason, we still don't have the option to go swimming. At the end of the day though, like, the overall feeling I have towards Outer Worlds 2 really just mirrors how I felt about that first game. In the way that while there's not really anything wrong with it, there's also not really anything that stands out about it either. When I'm playing it, I am hooked and locked in with whatever's happening, but then as soon as I finished that main story, I just had no real inclination to hop back in and start it all over again. And it was the same thing with the first game. Like, I sunk 20 hours into it, finished a whole heap with the side content, but then just never had any desire to go back. And I think that's what's happening here again.
Shouldn't have done that.
When you reach level 30, that's it as well. That's the current level cap. And you simply just stop earning XP from that point on, which kills any motivation I had to do any of the side content either. Plus, it does the same thing the first game did, where once you finish the story, you can't go back in and finish all the stuff you missed. Now, in the game's defense, it does blatantly tell you that you're hitting that point of no return, and it even lets you create a save file so you don't miss it. But it'd still be nice if there was just some kind of free roam after you'd finished the main campaign.
Why did you not mention any of this before?
Another thing is that yet again the ending just seems really half-baked and sudden, with the typical slideshow that feels like a PowerPoint presentation, going over the fates of all the different factions and characters you've interacted with. Which is the kind of thing that was fine back in 2010 with games like New Vegas, but I don't know, man, I would have kind of hoped that we progressed on from that point.
Oh no, I didn't mean that.
Overall though, Outer Worlds 2 is still a pretty good time. It's an actual role-playing game compared to certain other titles I've recently played. It looks good, the combat is fun, and the writing isn't ham-fisted. So yes, I do think it's worth checking out, but I just hope with the inevitable Outer Worlds 3 that they can find a way to make things seem a bit more innovative. Either way though, it's still a whole lot better than Avowed.